Professor Grupp. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. This is a new name to me, but apparently he is on Dr. Deagle's radio show quite often. Sounds like a fascinating guy. I would love to hear about his work with regard to the Nephilim and the Anunnaki and see where he's going with that. That would be fascinating. But in the meantime, do you have any comments to add to some of the discussion we've been having?
Well, I think that it's a balancing act that we need to actually be ever aware and ever alert to what's going on around us, and owning and taking upon yourself and owning a scenario or an agenda is much different than being aware of what they're attempting to do, and that's much like what it's like in the intelligence agencies and intelligence work, counterintelligence, which I'm most familiar with. And that is that they might have an agenda, but we always are aware that even when we plan something, even in our own lives, simply as easy as going to the movies, it may not happen. We might have a flat tire. We might get into a wreck. We could have all kinds of events that occur that keep what is the agenda that's being planned from happening. So I think there can be a lot of convoluted avenues that are injected into this scenario called bad things. And I think we oftentimes, just for the sake of saying it, are saying that, oftentimes confuse the fact with talking about events that are bad is actually owning them. Some people have, as their job or as a person that is trying to keep everybody else alert, like you and I would be doing with radio shows and programs, would be more inclined to be involved in finding out this information. But that doesn't mean that I or even you would be endorsing or taking upon ourselves the agenda. Now there's also what we call the time variance on the timeline. Now this gets pretty complicated, but just because there's a change doesn't mean the timeline that a person is on is gone. It just means that another fork in the road has occurred when you get into the quantum physics of that. So we have a lot of theory, we have a lot of application, and sometimes I think we get misled by some superstitious thought. And a lot of the information that we've got coming is mostly, I think, something that we have to do on a daily basis, and that's to just balance the information and know that really the answers to a lot of this have to do with going back to having the right attitude, not just for ourselves, but toward other people in our community. And that's why I keep pushing hard on getting involved with your community, because we need to become good neighbors. And if we can't change the heart in the way we approach our world, then we're not going to make it. That's just the bottom line. We won't be able to go beyond the rudimentary aspects of constantly being in pain and unhealthy, and being unhealthy has the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, and they're all connected. You can't separate those. So I think that's really important aspects. And I get into a lot of that when I'm teaching quantum therapy with frequency applications. And of course, when I worked on the West Nile virus for the state of Oklahoma, when we were working on getting these horses, the only remedy we had left, and oddly enough, a very simple one, of frequency therapy, was the best answer. So how does this all work, and getting a handle on how, and by the way, one of the things that I teach in anatomy class when I'm doing the pre-med nursing program is the very first thing that I tell them is we're moving away from drugs. We're moving into the world of quantum medicine, and that's going to be the next generation. And they need to get their head around that and kind of start getting prepared, because that's where we're going.
Well, that's a very good point. I'm glad to hear you're doing that, because that is, sort of the wave of the future. And obviously, you're you're going to be right at it. That's so vital for people to realize, is that you do have the power to heal your own body. Again, it depends, and this is something healers know, and you as a healer will know this sort of principle, which is you cannot heal someone who does not want to be healed, who has made a soul contract and is fulfilling something that they wanted to do in order to, they may have manifested, some kind of problem, in other words, with their physicality or even mentally. And that's because they want to experience a certain side to reality to teach themselves something, to raise their own awareness, but it may take a lifetime to do that. So there's those aspects of healing that people need to be sort of cognizant of, and understand that just because you give someone a remedy doesn't mean that they are going to actually put it into place and make it work for them. There is a lot more going on there on a lot of levels than just the most superficial level of, get well fast.
That's real common. I have story after story of events where somebody has no emotional need to get well, or they think they don't have that need to get well. And so we have to move through a much more emotional therapeutic approach than we do physical. In a therapy set up for somebody that may have cancer, let's say of the reproductive organs, it could lead clear back to maybe one of their parents, mother or father, or maybe the father, let's say it's a woman. She's having reproductive cancer issues. The father, old school, may have some kind of idea that maybe that she shouldn't be in a certain profession because that's a male-gendered profession. Or at least that's what his old school thinking might be thinking. And so she begins to be rejecting her sexual identity and therefore ends up having cancer, when it really goes back to an emotional rejection by her father. And so you can remedy the physical by dealing with the emotional. And you're right. In so many cases, I have seen people, they just don't want to get well because they think they need to be sick for various reasons, attention levels, and all kinds of others. One of the traps in existing medical model today and in our society is that we give disability out to people that are hurt, and then they begin to get improved, and yet there's no real black and white line. There's not Carrie, when somebody gets hurt and they can't work, it's not a progression from, today I'm well tomorrow, or today I'm sick, tomorrow I'm well. And so there's no midway point where people get assistance back into full-time employment. Oftentimes the employers either want you full-time or not. And you might try full-time employment only finding yourself unable to get there all the time, so it compromises your job, and so it complicates things. So then people psychologically begin to know they can't go back to work until they're completely well, but they know they have to, so to speak, reject being even partially well because they can't get assistance from their insurance or the state. And so we get into a bunch of psychological, emotional dependencies just because they're trying to fight for survival. And it's very powerful. It's very strong. And if you're in clinic work and you're a healer, you deal with that on an everyday, constant basis. It happens all the time.
Okay, we've got a lot of interference in the background here, but I agree with you. That's absolutely right. I do want to bring in the aspect of prior lives as well. That affects what kind of healing you're willing to accept. Again, if you're reliving some prior life, and I don't know what this sounds like on the other end, but it's quite loud here. We've got a leaf blower machine right out my door. But people are stemming back, their healing and their acceptance of their own healing is going to be based upon their prior life experiences and whether or not they want to re-experience something to learn something that they feel